Hello viewers, welcome to Raventhrow. On Thanksgiving Eve 1971, a man calling himself Dan Cooper boarded a Boeing 727, hijacked it with a bomb threat, extorted $200,000 in cash, then parachuted into a raging storm over the Pacific Northwest and vanished without a trace, becoming the only person in history to successfully hijack a commercial airliner and escape. Let me take you back to November 24, 1971. Portland International Airport. It was the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, one of the busiest travel days of the year, and Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 was preparing for its routine evening flight from Portland to Seattle. Among the 36 passengers boarding the Boeing 727 was a man in his mid-40s wearing a dark business suit, black tie and white shirt, carrying only a briefcase and a brown paper bag. He purchased his ticket at the counter, under the name Dan Cooper, for $18.20, paying in cash, and took his seat in row 18E near the rear of the aircraft. A flight attendant, Florence Schaffner, would later describe him as calm, polite, and utterly unremarkable. Just another businessman heading home for the holiday. The plane took off at 2:50 p.m. Pacific time under cloudy skies with light rain, climbing to its cruising altitude for the short 40-minute flight to Seattle. About 15 minutes after takeoff, somewhere over southwest Washington, the man in 18 East handed Florence Schaffner a note. She assumed it was a lonely businessman trying to get her phone number and tucked it into her pocket without reading it. The man leaned forward and said quietly, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." Schaffner opened the note and read the neatly printed message in all capital letters, stating he had a bomb in his briefcase and wanted her to sit next to him. She complied, and he opened the briefcase just wide enough for her to glimpse what appeared to be 8 red cylinders attached to wires and a battery, though she couldn't be certain it was real. His demands were precise and methodical. He wanted $200,000 in $20 bills, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck standing by in Seattle to refuel the aircraft for the next leg of the journey. He told Schaffner to write everything down exactly as he dictated, then take the note to the captain. Captain William Scott received the note in the cockpit and immediately notified Seattle Air Traffic Control that Flight 305 had been hijacked. The man who called himself Dan Cooper had given them until 5 p.m. to gather the ransom and parachutes, and he warned that if his demands weren't met, he would blow up the plane. Northwest Orient's president authorized payment of the ransom immediately, and the FBI began gathering the money from banks across Seattle, photographing each $20 bill and recording the serial numbers. By pure chance, they were able to obtain bills from a single bank run, all with consecutive serial numbers beginning with the letter L, making them traceable. Meanwhile, Seattle-Tacoma International Airport cleared the runway and prepared for an emergency landing. The FBI contacted local skydiving schools to obtain the 4 parachutes Cooper had demanded, 2 primary chutes and 2 reserve chutes. Though they had no idea why he wanted 4 or where he planned to jump, Flight 305 circled over Puget Sound for more than 2 hours while authorities assembled the ransom. The passengers knew something was wrong, but had no idea their plane had been hijacked, and the hijacker himself remained calm and ordered bourbon and water, which he drank slowly while waiting. At 5:24 p.m., nearly 3 hours after the hijacking began, Captain Scott received clearance to land at Seattle-Tacoma Airport. Cooper allowed all 36 passengers and 2 of the 3 flight attendants to deplane in exchange for the money and parachutes, but he kept the pilot, co-pilot, flight engineer, and 1 flight attendant, Tina Mucklow, on board. A Northwest Orient employee approached the aircraft and delivered a canvas bag containing 10,000 $20 bills weighing 21 pounds, along with the 4 parachutes. Cooper examined the money carefully but didn't count it, and he inspected the parachutes with what appeared to be knowledge of skydiving equipment. He then issued new instructions that puzzled everyone. He wanted the plane to fly toward Mexico City at minimum speed without lowering the landing gear, staying below 10,000 feet altitude with the rear stairs deployed and the cabin unpressurized. Captain Scott explained this flight plan was impossible without refueling stops. Cooper studied aeronautical charts he'd requested and agreed to a refueling stop in Reno, Nevada. He specified the plane should take off with flaps at 15 degrees and the crew should remain in the cockpit with the door closed during the flight, which meant no one would see what he did in the passenger cabin. At 7:40 p.m. on Thanksgiving Eve, Flight 305 took off from Seattle heading south with 1 hijacker, 4 crew members, $200,000, and 4 parachutes aboard. The weather had deteriorated dramatically with heavy rain, strong winds, and a storm system moving through the region with cloud cover down to 5,000 feet. Cooper directed flight attendant Tina Mucklow to join the crew in the cockpit and close the door behind her, leaving him alone in the passenger cabin. She was the last person to see him, describing him as calm and courteous even as he prepared for whatever came next. At approximately 8 p.m., somewhere over the wilderness of southwest Washington, a warning light illuminated in the cockpit, indicating the rear air stair had been activated. Captain Scott radioed Cooper on the intercom asking if he needed anything, but received no response, only the sound of wind rushing through the open cabin. The crew felt a sudden upward movement of the tail section at 8:13 p.m., as if a weight had been released from the rear of the aircraft. They couldn't see into the passenger cabin and had no way of knowing what had happened, but they suspected Cooper had jumped. Flight 305 landed in Reno at 10:15 p.m., where FBI agents and police stormed the aircraft with weapons drawn, only to find the passenger cabin completely empty. Cooper was gone, having jumped into a November rainstorm at night over mountainous wilderness terrain, with temperatures near freezing and winds exceeding 100 miles per hour. He had taken the money and 2 parachutes with him, but left behind the 2 reserve chutes, his black clip-on tie, a tie clip with a pearl, and 8 cigarette butts in the seat ashtray. He had also done something peculiar with one of the parachutes, cutting the cords from the reserve chute and using them for unknown purposes. The largest manhunt in FBI history began immediately, with search teams deploying across southwest Washington and northern Oregon along the flight path. They searched forests, rivers, mountains, and remote logging roads looking for any trace of a parachutist, a parachute or $200,000 in cash. But Dan Cooper had vanished into the storm as completely as if he'd never existed. And despite weeks of intensive searching through some of the most rugged terrain in the Pacific Northwest, authorities found absolutely nothing. No parachute, no body, no money, and no evidence anyone had survived the jump. The investigation revealed that Dan Cooper wasn't even the hijacker's real name. A reporter had misread the name as D.B. Cooper, and the error stuck, with the hijacker becoming known as D.B. Cooper in media reports worldwide, even though he never used that name himself. The FBI interviewed hundreds of suspects over the following months and years, trying to identify a man who left almost no physical evidence and whose description could match thousands of middle-aged businessmen. Flight attendant descriptions were consistent but generic: white male, mid-40s, about 6 feet tall, 170 to 180 pounds, dark brown hair, brown eyes, olive complexion. Investigators discovered the hijacker had displayed knowledge of aircraft operations, parachuting techniques, and local geography that suggested military or aviation experience. He knew the Boeing 727 was the only commercial airliner with rear stairs that could be deployed in flight, and he specified flight parameters that would make the jump theoretically survivable. But everything about the jump seemed designed for failure. Cooper leaped into darkness over unfamiliar terrain during a severe rainstorm with no knowledge of where he'd land, wearing only a business suit and loafers with no helmet or protective gear. The parachute he chose was a military surplus, MB-8, that required manual deployment, and he was carrying 21 pounds of cash that would destabilize his descent. Experienced skydivers who analyzed the jump concluded survival was possible but unlikely. The low altitude gave him less than 2 minutes from exit to landing. The storm would obscure any visual reference points, and the forested mountains below offered few safe landing zones. Impact with trees at terminal velocity would almost certainly be fatal. Yet the FBI's massive ground search found nothing in the immediate aftermath, which seemed to suggest Cooper had somehow survived and escaped the search perimeter. The area where he likely jumped was remote wilderness, with limited access, covered in dense forest, and bisected by the Columbia River. But surely a body or parachute would eventually be discovered. The first major theory proposed that Cooper died in the jump and his remains simply weren't found in the vast wilderness. The search area covered thousands of square miles of difficult terrain, and the body under the forest canopy could easily remain hidden indefinitely. This theory was supported by the harsh conditions and the extreme risk of the jump itself. But this theory had problems. If Cooper died, where was the money? 21 pounds of $20 bills doesn't decompose, and $200,000 in cash should be discoverable even if a body wasn't. And where was the parachute? which would be even more visible than a body in aerial searches. A second theory suggested Cooper was an experienced parachutist who survived the jump and escaped with the money, making it the perfect crime. He had planned meticulously, chosen his aircraft carefully, and timed the hijacking for maximum confusion during the holiday travel period. His calm demeanor suggested confidence in his plan. This theory gained support from Cooper's apparent knowledge of parachutes and aircraft, his specific demands regarding flight parameters, and the complete absence of evidence in the landing zone. Perhaps he'd cached supplies in the forest, used a vehicle hidden nearby, or had accomplices waiting to assist his escape. However, this theory couldn't explain why an expert parachutist would make such catastrophically poor choices. Jumping at night in a storm without proper equipment, wearing street clothes with no knowledge of the landing zone, and carrying 21 pounds of unstable weight was virtually suicidal. No experienced skydiver would attempt such a jump. The investigation took a dramatic turn in February 1980 when 8-year-old Brian Ingram was digging a fire pit along the Columbia River near Vancouver, Washington, and unearthed 3 packets of decomposed $20 bills. The FBI confirmed the serial numbers matched the Cooper ransom money. The discovery of $5,800 buried in the sand along the river raised more questions than it answered. How did the money get there? The bills were badly decomposed and fragmented, suggesting they'd been buried for years, but the location was miles from the suspected jump zone. Scientists analyzed the bills and the sand layers where they were found, determining the money had arrived at that location between 1974 and 1976, years after the hijacking. This meant the bills hadn't simply fallen there during the jump, but had been transported by water, erosion, or human action to that spot sometime later. The discovery seemed to support the theory Cooper died in the jump, with his body and the money ending up in the Columbia River, where the bills gradually washed downstream and were deposited on the sandbar. But if the money was in the river, why were these the only bills ever found? Why not more money scattered along the riverbank? A third theory emerged suggesting Cooper was a disgruntled airline employee or military veteran with insider knowledge who planned the hijacking as revenge or financial desperation. Several suspects over the years fit this profile, including Richard Floyd McCoy Jr., who hijacked a United Airlines flight just 5 months later using an almost identical method. McCoy was a former Green Beret and experienced skydiver who successfully parachuted from a 727, with $500,000 in ransom. Though he was captured 2 days later and the money recovered, the FBI investigated McCoy extensively as a potential Cooper suspect, but ruled him out based on physical description discrepancies. Other suspects included Kenneth Christensen, a Northwest Orient flight attendant and military paratrooper who matched the physical description and died in 1994 after allegedly confessing to his brother, and Barbara Dayton, who claimed she was D.B. Cooper and had undergone gender transition after the hijacking, though the FBI found no evidence supporting these claims. The most compelling suspect for many investigators was Robert Rackstraw, a former Army pilot and explosives expert with parachute training who matched the physical description and had a history of fraud and deception. Rackstraw was investigated multiple times but never charged, and he maintained his innocence until his death in 2019. Despite 45 years of investigation, over 1,000 suspects interviewed, and countless tips following television documentaries and news specials, the FBI officially closed the case in 2016 without identifying D.B. Cooper. They had exhausted all credible leads and decided to focus resources on more current investigations. The enduring mystery of D.B. Cooper has produced theories ranging from the plausible to the absurd, with amateur investigators proposing everything from CIA conspiracies to witness protection program cover-ups. But the fundamental questions remain unanswered. Who was he, did he survive, and where is the money? Physical evidence recovered from the aircraft yielded few clues. The tie and tie clip were analyzed for DNA but produced no matches in any database, and the 8 cigarette butts suggested Cooper was a heavy smoker but provided no identification. Microscopic particles on the tie revealed rare metals, suggesting he may have worked in a chemical or aerospace manufacturing facility. The parachute cords he cut from the reserve chute were never found, and may have been used to secure the money bag to his body during the jump, though this remains speculation. And his choice to leave behind 2 functional reserve parachutes while taking a military surplus main chute puzzled investigators who could undetermine his reasoning. Weather data from that night painted a grim picture of the conditions Cooper faced. The storm system produced sustained winds of 35 miles per hour with gusts over 50, heavy rain, temperatures around 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and complete cloud cover. Visibility was near zero, and the wind chill from freefall would create hypothermic conditions within seconds. Flight data recorders and crew testimony established that Cooper jumped somewhere over the Washougal River Valley in southwest Washington, probably near the town of Ariel, placing him in some of the most remote and rugged terrain in the region. The area was, and remains, heavily forested with limited access and few residents. If Cooper survived the landing, he would have faced a nighttime trek through rain-soaked wilderness with no survival gear, wearing wet business clothes in near-freezing temperatures, while carrying 21 pounds of cash. Hypothermia would set in within hours, making survival increasingly unlikely even if the jump itself didn't kill him. Yet no confirmed evidence of his death has ever been found. No bones, no parachute fragments, no definitively linked personal items beyond the 3 packets of money discovered 9 years later miles from the supposed landing zone. This absence of evidence keeps the legend alive and the mystery unsolved. Modern analysis using advanced computer modeling and weather data has narrowed the possible landing zone, with some researchers using the money discovery location to work backwards and estimate where Cooper entered the Columbia River. But these calculations produce probability zones, not definitive answers, and searching forested mountains decades after the event offers diminishing returns. The FBI's official position is that Cooper probably died in the jump or shortly thereafter from the impact or exposure, but they acknowledge the complete absence of remains is unusual. They note that the wilderness where he likely landed is so remote and dense that a body could remain undiscovered indefinitely. Some investigators believe Cooper survived the jump but died from injuries or exposure before reaching civilization, with his remains scattered by animals or hidden beneath decades of forest debris. This would explain both the absence of a body in the immediate search area and the money appearing in the river years later. Others maintain Cooper pulled off the perfect crime, surviving the jump through luck or skill, escaping the search perimeter, and living quietly somewhere with his $200,000. Point to the lack of any credible death evidence and note that people successfully disappear even in modern times with surveillance everywhere. The legend of D.B. Cooper has become embedded in American folklore, inspiring books, movies, television episodes, and endless speculation. His calm demeanor, polite behavior toward the crew, and audacious escape captured public imagination in a way few criminals have, with many viewing him as a folk hero rather than a hijacker. But the reality is that Cooper committed a serious federal crime, terrorizing 36 passengers and crew members with a bomb threat and stealing money through violence and intimidation. The romanticism surrounding the case often overlooks the victims and the precedent his temporary success created for other hijackings. And so the mystery endures with a man who called himself Dan Cooper, vanishing into a November storm with $200,000, leaving behind only a clip-on tie-8 cigarette butts and $5,800 buried in a riverbank. Whether he died in the wilderness that night or walked away to live another life remains unknown, and barring some extraordinary discovery, the truth probably died with him. The case of D.B. Cooper stands as the only unsolved act of air piracy in American history. A perfect crime that probably wasn't perfect at all but simply ended in death, so complete that even the evidence of failure disappeared into the Pacific Northwest wilderness, taking the answer with it into the storm and the darkness and the unforgiving November night. If you enjoyed this journey into one of America's most enduring unsolved mysteries, subscribe to Raventhrow, where we explore the cases that continue to haunt us, the disappearances that defy explanation, and the historical enigmas that refuse to reveal their secrets.